Hey guys, this is Rob, and in the forthcoming video, I made a couple errors in some statements that I made. The first was that I stated that with the example of Carnage, that the symbiotes take on the attributes of the host that they take over, and that's actually incorrect. The symbiotes are their own organisms. They can think, they can feel, they can make their own decisions, and they're actually considered to be a mutant among their own species. So the symbiotes function best when they have the same kind of attributes, that is to say, the same feelings and emotions and thoughts as the host that they take over. That's why the Venom symbiote bonded so well with Eddie Brock, because they both hated Spider-Man. And as far as the statement with Galactus goes, I had made the statement that Galactus was a human being. I made that statement in error. I recognize that Galactus is not a human being. I apparently just wasn't paying attention at the time. Galactus is more of a cosmic entity, but I go further into that in the video. So, with that being said, let me know what you guys think. I'll catch you guys later. Peace. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and today I wanted to have a discussion about good and evil, the philosophy behind good and evil, and the Marvel Comics. Because in the Marvel Universe, there are a litany of characters that we could consider to be villains, but they may not be wholly evil. Now, I'm not denying that there are inherently evil characters in the Marvel Universe. For example, Carnage is an inherently evil character. He is the symbiote, the same kind of symbiote that attached itself to Eddie Brock and became Venom. But the difference between Carnage and Venom is that, one, the symbiote attaches to the bloodstream of Cletus Cassidy, and two, when a symbiote takes on a host, it takes on the traits of that host. And Cletus Cassidy was a sadist murderer. He was absolutely insane. And so Carnage began to conduct itself in the same fashion. But individuals who are perceived as being evil but not inherently evil are the most intriguing characters to me. And for this video, I want to use two main examples. I want to use Galactus, and I want to use Apocalypse. And the reason why is because their belief systems and the way that they choose to conduct themselves are motives that we would consider to be evil, but are not inherently evil. They're simply perceptions of how we define good and evil. So, in order to understand them as characters, we kind of need to understand their backstory. And I'm also assuming that those of you who are watching this video, at least a good majority of you, are unaware of these characters, aside from maybe Galactus being mentioned in one of the Fantastic Four films, in which case Galactus wasn't very well defined in that film. So, starting with Galactus, Galactus is actually a being called Galen, and he was the sole survivor of the previous universe. The one thing to bear in mind is that in the Marvel Comics, of course, they have beings like the Living Tribunal, which is directly under the One Above All, who for all intents and purposes is more or less kind of God in the Marvel Comics. But there have been and will continue to be multiple universes, each one coming after the other when the previous universe pretty much kind of collapses on itself. And that's where Galactus came from. Galactus is the imbuement or the embodiment of all of the sentience in the previous universe combined into one. And so his powers are astronomical. And multiple entities in the cosmos, let's say eternity and death, for example, argue that Apocalypse is a necessary part of the natural order of things. If he didn't exist, there would be horrible consequences. And indeed, there is actually a point where he is effectively kind of killed, and the result is a character named Abraxas that we won't go into. But he was a pretty horrible guy. But nonetheless, Galactus, in order for him to survive, he has to travel from one planet to another, consuming the life force of that planet, and then moving on to the next. He doesn't do it by virtue of the fact that he enjoys inflicting pain on people. He simply does it because it's necessary for him to exist. With Apocalypse, it's a little bit different. Apocalypse was, for all intents and purposes, the first mutant ever born. And when he was born into his tribe, he was abandoned by it, simply because he was born with gray skin and with these blue lips and lines running up along the side of his face. The facial attributes that he has in this picture, that's the way that he looked when he was born. Because he was abandoned, he was adopted by a group called the Sandstormers, and their leader, Baal, Baal, had adopted him and raised him as his own. Now, this group had a very extremist Darwin viewpoint. That is to say, only the strongest deserve to survive. And this was a viewpoint that Apocalypse would hold. Now, the reason why I chose to use Apocalypse, even despite having that viewpoint, is because he takes what most of us consider to be an evolutionary standpoint. He simply argues that those who cannot survive don't deserve to survive, And Darwinism takes the exact same approach. Evolution isn't random chance. Evolution is not things just kind of happening. I mean, evolution doesn't take lives and throw them into a jar and then shake it up, pour it out, and just see what see what happens. Evolution is a progress. Evolution will create an organism. If that organism is unable to survive, then it will die off, and evolution will try it again, except it will change something. And if that creature is able to survive in that environment, it'll thrive and it'll grow and it'll evolve into something else. Apocalypse more or less kind of speeds this process up. He basically implements a series of plans, some that take place thousands of years in the future and work their way back, whether because someone like Cable jumps back in time, someone like Strife jumps back in time, or he actually implements them in the past and watches them play out as time progresses. But the fact remains that he more or less kind of speeds up this idea of evolution. Apocalypse is really kind of intriguing in this concept of the idea of evolution because his inherent mutant powers are not anything spectacular. When Apocalypse was first born, he had superhuman strength, superhuman stamina, and with those two things combined, superhuman speed. He had invulnerability, some measure of invulnerability at the very least, immortality, and the ability to take on or give away mass in order to grow or to shrink in size, respectively. There came a point in his history, it was somewhere around 1100 AD or something like that, where he came into contact with celestial technology by a mishmash of different circumstances where he almost died. And because he was able to merge with celestial technology, he was given an offer by a being named Exxon, who was a celestial. And he said, either you can take on this technology and move forward, and at some point in the distant future, have to pay for these gifts that we've given you, or you can go from here and forget everything that you know so far. And of course, he accepted, and he was imbued with a litany of new powers. I mean, he can control his entire molecular structure and grant himself any superhuman power that you could imagine, short of being able to alter reality and time travel. He is a genius, just having been around for thousands of years, and a lot of characters that exist in the Marvel Comics exist because of him. But nonetheless, we're kind of digressing a little bit. The very argument of saying that Apocalypse is an inherently evil human being is tantamount, or it is synonymous with saying that that evolution in and of itself is inherently evil. Now, we can offer different justifications and say that the fact that Apocalypse introduced the legacy virus because he introduced the techno-organic virus and he killed off people unnecessarily who could have simply just survived on their own is an inherently evil act. But again, we could make the argument, we could say that human beings as they stand now in the Marvel Universe are not mutants. And because they're not mutants, one of two things will happen. Because of the rate in which mutants are being born, humanity will cease to exist, or at somewhere along the line, existing humans will develop mutant powers. Regardless of the scenario, non-powered mutants, or non-powered human beings, non-mutants, basically, will eventually die off simply by the aspect of evolution. So the question becomes, is there really a difference between what Apocalypse wants to do and what evolution has been doing since the dawn of life on the planet Earth down to the first amoeba? With Galactus, Galactus is not an inherently evil human being because, one, he is an intricate part of reality. He simply has to exist. For him to exist is no different for a black hole to exist that sucks in life and destroys planets and solar systems. He simply does it in order to survive. Now, to say that what he does in order to survive is wrong is to simply say that a person that's attempting to survive to preserve their own life is wrong for doing so, which goes against the basic fundamental principles of what I consider to be the definition of humanity. Now, when you get into the nitty-gritty of defining right and wrong, this is when things get even a little bit murkier. The definition of right and wrong, and I'm actually kind of scooting away from Marvel Comics and just talking about more of a philosophical stance here. The definition of right and wrong is relative to the society in which we exist. We create laws that say don't kill people, not because we think killing is wrong, but because we don't want to have to worry about being killed indiscriminately. We make laws that say don't steal from people, not because we believe stealing is inherently wrong, but because we don't want to have to worry about consistently coming home and finding our house having been smashed into. We make these laws in order to keep ourselves safe, to provide some measure of protection, and to maintain order in society. So the question that I pose is, do good and evil truly even exist? But going by the standard that we've created here, by going by the standard of saying that these constructs of good and evil are not necessarily a reflection of what good and evil truly are, but are actually a reflection of what we choose to use in order to organize society, we now look at characters like Apocalypse and Galactus and ask the question, are these inherently evil beings? Do they define what we consider to be good and evil, or what good and evil actually are, or are they simply just characters who exist and are carrying out the natural order of things, or simply trying to maintain their survival? And to me, this is why it's so interesting. This is why it's so intriguing. Again, I don't mean to say that there are not evil characters in the Marvel Comics. For those of you guys who are having a nerdgasm, or I guess a little bit of nerd rage at this point, I'm sorry, those are total opposites. But for those of you guys who are going into a little bit of nerd rage at the moment, I don't mean to say there are not inherently evil individuals. But when it comes to a lot of villains, I just simply kind of wanted to raise the point and say that not everyone is really an evil being. Sometimes they just do things because it's the natural order of things. They are imposing the natural order of things by speeding it up a little bit, or they're simply just trying to live. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.